So we want to thank you all for being here today. As we've heard some talk before, a lot of the privacy and security aspects of healthcare are both on the business and IT side. And a lot of the ways that the business is talking to IT and finding that relationship relies on the vendors to help create that solution. As we heard, even we have Wes Wright from Imprivata up here, who William Perry spoke about just a minute ago. And so we wanted to have some of our vendor partners come up here today and talk about what we're facing in security, because when we're looking at forward thinking about what the entire business is based about, these security vendors have nothing to worry about but security. So we wanted to bring them up today and have some discussions about what they're facing, what they're seeing, and how they're partnering with healthcare organizations to help keep your patient information secure and everything private. So we'll go down the line and do some quick introductions here.
Check. Sibilance.
Fred Langston, EVP Professional Services at CI Security.
My name is Andrew Lancashire. I work for Mcafee on security operations strategies for our customers.
Andy Dela Cruz, I work for Aruba Networks for consulting security engineer. I've been there for about 2 years. Came from the customer side also.
Me as well. Wes Wright, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Imprivata. Just prior to Imprivata, I was a Chief Technology Officer out at a small IDN in Northern California at Sutter Health.
I worked there with you.
Andrew and I worked together there. He was on the, as William was talking about earlier, the separation of church and state with the CISO versus
on the
CIO. He thinks he was on the church side. I personally think I was on the church side. But the way we did things is Andrew and his team would, like William was saying, identify the risk and then pass that risk off to me as the CTO. I ran all the operational security. So Andrew would say, here's a risk, not try and tell me how to solve it, because that's a good way to get your CIO-CISO relationship bad. But said, here's the risk. I would figure out a way to solve it using the tools that we had, or maybe need to buy some new tools, and then take it back to Andrew and his crew and say, I think we mitigated the risk this way, and they'd give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So that's how we work together at Sutter.
This is true. Yeah, we had a very interesting experience. The speaker who was before us was talking about, the organization chart and who should report where. We reported up to the chief legal officer. Of course, Wes reported up through the CIO's office. And it was interesting. And so that question about, should you be reporting to the CIO, it's sort of like, are you in the frying pan and about to jump into the fire, or are you in that opposite situation? It definitely had its challenges to go up that legal road.
Well, and I think one more thing that you got to realize in that relationship, as a CTO, is and continues to be my job to really push innovation as fast as I can and to get things digitally transformed as fast as I can. Andrew and I went back on a couple of different issues. I wanted to go this way, and I wanted to go this way fast as I possibly could. And sometimes I didn't put all the security stuff in there that maybe Andrew wanted to see. So we went back and forth a couple times. I think the CISO component, if you're trying to push digital transformation, you have got to have that check and that check and balance equation. And if the CISO's office is working for the CIO, you don't have a strong of, wait a minute, check this.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with company culture when it comes down to it. And whether that culture is really ready for a significant change like that. Ours happened to be because we had a few significant, we'll call them situations.
Situations, yes.
Prior to that. So I think it comes down to culture.
Well, kind of going in, we talked about innovation, new things going into the business and in healthcare. And I think for anyone here who was at HIMSS this year, one of the big innovations in the push is machine learning and artificial intelligence, and the way that everyone from networking to endpoint security to data security is really focusing and hyping up the machine learning. But when we were talking, we brought up that that's wonderful, but there are also some concerns around that. So when we're looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning, bringing that into a security portfolio to protect the organization, what are you guys seeing as some concerns along those lines?
Sure. So I think the one thing a lot of people don't realize is the bad guys are using machine learning and AI at the same rate that the security industry is implementing AI and machine learning. So if we've got nation states like China, North Korea, they are investing huge amounts to use their AI to hack us. So as fast as we're moving, it's an arms race. It's not going to tip the scales, I think, like everybody keeps hoping. This is the panacea that's going to solve all our problems. And the other part is the data, right? You can use learning sets, data sets that can train our ML as a defender to not recognize particular threats, right? And that's what China and other countries are doing. They're feeding us massive amounts of data that is training our systems to learn things that aren't going to help us detect problems. So they're ahead of this, right? They're as smart as we are, so they're putting a lot of resources into this. The other things that go along with this is if you want to implement machine learning or AI, you have a similar people problem that you're trying to solve, right? So we look at some of the AI helping us in incident response, for example. Well, if you don't have a great set of AI engineers to train and tune and make that system optimized, you're not going to get the most out of it. So you're trading one people problem, maybe SOC analyst, for AI engineers. I think SOC analysts are probably farther along in the maturity journey than AI engineers are. So you may be trading for the wrong thing in this. So it holds a lot of promise, but there are a lot of problems as well.
So in a very practical way, the phishing email that you've all trained your staff on for the last 2 years to kind of pick up on these nuances and language and grammar and things like that, it's about to get a whole lot smarter. And you may have already started to see the sophistication coming into play with some of these sample phishing emails that some of your users receive. And so AI is a big contributing factor to how not only it's used for defense, but on the offensive side, it's being used very effectively to really personify exactly what a natural language email should look like, and it's really tricky.
Yeah, and things that I've seen is actually that, where I see the shortcomings is that if you look at a lot of solutions that people are coming out with today or companies are coming out with today is you get a lot of it to where it's still fractured. You still have stuff where you have visibility that you're going to be on application visibility, or you're going to do network visibility. Which one are you going to try to throw money at? My thing is it's a lot easier, and there's good articles on where the future's going, or whether they're calling it XHR or whatever it is. It's how do you correlate all that visibility back together so that you can see and not have these disparate systems? Because a lot of times what your problem's going to be is that you need a lot of data. And in my opinion, personal opinion is the more data that you can have, the more visibility, the more fidelity that you can have. And if you can get a lot of high fidelity, then maybe you can get more, you can make more and better analysis. Because really it's about analytics. I don't like to say the word AI because it's not, AI is a loosely word term, but from a machine learning perspective, it's about analysis. So how do I correlate, and some of the challenges is, how do I collect so much data, have the infrastructure to have that much data? And it's a challenge because not a lot of people or companies can have that resource, but be able to have true visibility in my infrastructure and not have these as much gaps and still where I'm trying to still silo some of my solutions and pick up chunks here and there. But how do I try to get complete visibility in my whole infrastructure and try to correlate that back to at least some kind of risk, and not so much of, hey, I got one risk on one side, but how do I see it all the way through from the beginning to end kind of concept. So that's where I think, you know, a lot of companies are still trying to figure that out. It's very expensive, you know, from a challenge perspective. It requires a lot of resource. What I mean by expensive is, you know, a lot of computing power, a lot of storage power, requires a lot of infrastructure to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, my major concern, and Fred brought it up, is what we're using or how we're training our AI or ML. You know, it brings to mind an old Steve Martin sketch where when he had a kid, he wanted to train his kid to say, I need to go foo-foo in the banana patch for if I need to go to the bathroom. We're training some of our ML stuff to say, I need to go foo-foo in the banana patch, and we don't even know that right now. So a little concerned about that.
So is that a big thing that they're reaching out to you, and you're having these conversations with CISOs or other organizations that are reaching out from a network? Are they looking to you to advise them on how to best approach that threatscape of what you're seeing from different people?
I think on that term, AI and ML specifically, there's a bit of a fatigue rate right now because nobody can really define it. It's not like all machine learning is the same and all AI is the same. It's all in the secret sauce of what somebody's created behind the scenes. And what you ask about today and what they describe today as a vendor and what they describe a year from now is obviously going to change, and it should change. It should pivot with the threat surface area. And so I think it's important as consumers to really get in and say, you know, what exactly is machine learning supposed to do? And ask for those experts to come to the forefront and actually really speak in easy to understand terms about what is the business value behind this.
And I would say probably the biggest thing that we're probably advising a lot of companies, it's mostly the fact that it's not a matter of whether machine learning is going to solve all your problems. Probably what we're looking at today is a lot of companies are probably doing the right thing. A lot of companies are doing a lot of logging, doing a lot of data collection. Problem is that may not have the resources to be able to sift through all that data and be able to find that needle in the haystack concept. It's not a matter that we don't want to see it. Usually what we're advising is saying, hey, let's use, you know, if we can use machine learning to be able to say, let's take some of that data. You may not have the resources to analyze it all, but that's where a machine learning will come into play of saying, like, hey, let's be able to analyze information and let's be able to quickly sift through 100,000 logs and try to find something that's anomalous within all that data, and try to present it up in some way and be able to, you know, help your analysts be more effective and more efficient, more than being able to try to solve all your security threat concept. It's how do we use the technology to help your staff or your limited staff be more efficient and effective.
Yeah, one thing that we've also found as well is there's a term human-assisted machine learning, which is vastly more effective, we found, at least in our environment, when you've got humans kind of doing the same things they always do, but validating the things that machine learning is finding. And by having that human element, it accelerates the machine learning capabilities and effectiveness much faster. So I can't imagine, at least in security, not using human-assisted machine learning as the basis for what we're doing. It's not just going to go learn and figure things out on its own. It almost always needs human intervention to make it effective.
Almost my entire job is to go around and talk to CXOs and figure out, you know, how we can help them. My boss uses me more as a CTO consultant, kind of, and I, at least in the last 3 months, can't think of any CISO who has mentioned AI to me whatsoever. They are trying to catch up with the blocking and tackling now. Identity governance stuff, the GRC stuff that you have to do for identity governance. They're trying to lay that stuff in. The micro segmentation that you have to do for PCI, trying to get that stuff in. I mean, John Bennett, who we work together with at Sutter, said something that I'm going to steal, but I think he stole it too, is right now, the CISOs, the CXOs are so busy working in the business that they've got no time to step back and work on the business. That's where I find almost all the CXOs that I talk to, it's the foundational stuff. And they may have, like we were able to at Sutter because they had a big staff, they may have this other unit out here that can do some on the business work, but everybody else is just buried in the business.
Very good. Now you talked a little bit about bringing in data and having to bring in all these different sources of data points. I know that someone brought up around 1 million IoT devices in an organization at one point in time. And that, of course, is going to create a whole different, because machine learning about behaviors. And now we're looking at everyone has 4 or 5 devices. So when you're looking to maybe address how to keep within a BYOD and a CYOD environment and all these different devices that are capturing information and pumping, how are you guys looking at securing these IoT devices with such a wide range of security issues that can come up?
So for me, the thing that I think is interesting about machine learning is IoT devices tend to talk the same way all the time. Their behaviors are very rigorous, very structured. So machine learning is kind of really built for looking at things like IoT, because they're not like humans that are constantly changing their behaviors. I got to monitor different things. I don't know what that means. IoT devices are sending patient information to some central monitoring facility all the time. The packets look the same. So it works, or it should be, a really useful tool in managing IoT, or medical IoT in particular.
So Wes and I both have a very similar experience at Sutter Health. We established an annual goal. We incentivized it. It was part of the annual payout.
Not just ours. I mean, it was a part of the CEO's
That's correct.
bonus.
Yeah. It cascaded down through everybody in the company who was eligible. And so everybody now has a stake in that. And so a project like that is obviously very difficult to do. And I don't think it really gets done unless you financially incentivize that. But there again, it's a cultural decision and a risk tolerance decision to go down the road of doing that. The project in essence was to really segregate off all the biomedical devices year one, focusing on the unmanaged assets that may have been provided by vendors or may just be sort of off the radar as part of the building management stuff. And that was sort of the year two stuff. But it was not easy. It required a lot of human effort. The biggest thing that concerned me was how do you live with that afterwards? It's a very manual process still. I know technology is coming along to assist, but still it's a very manual process.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would actually say that some of the challenge, probably one of the biggest challenges I've been talking to a lot of hospitals about are, as much as we all like to think, and even other industries, that we have good control over our infrastructure, we usually don't know what's being introduced and taken out and in at a 24-hour period concept. What's getting plugged into our infrastructure right away, or what do you have out there? What have you acquired over the last 20 years that's still plugged in there? So the idea of being able to somehow identify that endpoint or the devices or just stuff that's out there, so that you have a good understanding of what the risk is, and then be able to kind of roll that into some of that risk mitigation concept. Is usually where a lot of industries, healthcare, even outside of healthcare, is having a challenge, because a lot of times, I came from a hospitality gaming. I mean, it was a huge infrastructure, and it was a lot of the company and a lot of the people thought they had a good understanding of what devices and what was in their infrastructure, and they were off by about a few thousand. And so when that picture was able to come to life a little bit, it really changed everyone's perspective a little bit, from a threat perspective and risk. And I think from if you kind of think about machine learning, you're seeing a lot more solutions where they're trying to, it's helpful, like they said earlier, is usually IoT have the very same components. They look very similar hardware-wise. They look, touch and feel the same, but they function differently usually. So being able to identify that kind of approach to try to get a better understanding of what is it that you have out there, and then also to try to understand that is that something that's just risky versus allowed, is kind of where I've seen a lot of companies start to ask, where should we start? Where should we, what do I need to do and what do I need to identify? And usually we're saying, okay, hey, how good a control do you really have over your infrastructure? You may want to feel like you have good control, but do you really have that visibility to be able to see what's being introduced or what's in your infrastructure 24 hours a day? Any second of the day, do you know what gets plugged into your infrastructure? And that's, in my eyes, that's probably one of the most important things outside of just, whether you're, trying to stop certain things and attacks. It's like, understand what you got first, and then let's figure out how you can address that.
Yeah. Fundamentally, for some reason, we want to treat IoT, or the other term I hear because we're in healthcare is IOMT, Internet of Medical Things. We want to treat that differently. But I can tell you from a CTO and operational perspective, it's the same thing that you've been doing for 15 years. You find what's on your network. That's the first thing you have to do. And fortunately, we got tools like Mitigate and Order, and I talked to somebody from Zingbox in here earlier too. Those things have just come around in the last 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden you have incredible visibility of what's on your network. That's what killed us before. We couldn't see what was on there. Now use the new tools, and then use the ML and stuff behind them to do the same thing you've always done on your PC networks, is micro-segment them. Push that risk over there. Put ACLs in place. A lot of the new tools will do that for you almost automatically. Somebody referenced PCI before. These new tools out there, they'll find all your PCI devices for you and segment them off your regular network so that, boom, you got PCI compliance. It's the same thing we've been doing for 10 years. We just want to make it into something else because it's a cool term.
One thing I like to point out too, a lot of people, when they talk about IoT and healthcare, they talk about medical devices. There are 100 other types of IoT in a hospital or in a care provision environment that have nothing to do with medical devices, right? It's the cameras that are watching entrance into the building, it's the card key system, it's the HVAC system. There are a million things that could be at this day and age that could be IoT devices that you're not considering because you're thinking medical IoT, right? That's what I'm trying to protect, patient safety. Well, you can lose a patient just as easily in an OR if you kill the HVAC system and you can't cool the room, right? So you can have a patient in the middle of a procedure get wheeled out because you can't keep the climate control at the right space. So it's not just medical devices that can impact patient care or security.
Yeah, ask Citrix and Target about your HVAC vendors.
Yeah.
Well, and when you even talking about these future-facing aspects of the business, I hear you guys talk a lot about the people. It's always coming back to the people, whether it be the admins, the one collecting the information. But when I talk to clients, I hear a lot of the issue is keeping people, finding someone who's going to come and look at this information and have the right security staff who are going to be focused on this. Obviously, it sounds like something you've been going into, but have you ever been in a situation, or what's your advice to people who are facing staffing issues and lack of skill set?
Let's start that.
Oh, geez, I wasn't expecting to start this.
Switching it up on you.
Yeah, so as we said, I was based just right outside of Silicon Valley in Sacramento, California when we worked at Sutter. So yeah, we had a lot of folks trying to snipe our folks a little bit, but we started it. We started taking, I mean, some of the major healthcare companies now are bringing in outsiders from other industries. I have my own particular theories on why that's happening. It's the same way. First, you have to have at least, a 5 or 10% within the salary range. But people leave bosses. People don't leave companies. So it's again back to we're doing the same thing for IoT. Well, it's the same management characteristics that will keep your folks working with you. They want to do new and exciting things. And if all they're doing is blocking and tackling all the time, they're going to go somewhere and do new and exciting things.
And I would agree. I would say for in my previous life, of most of the people that we probably lost, it wasn't necessarily because they hated me or they hated the manager or something like that. It usually was wind up being that the opportunity, whether it was going to be that they got to do other things. They liked security, but security just became a half-hearted effort in their eyes. The company tried to act like they're trying to do security because they're trying to do a checkbox. I heard somebody say about checkbox, but they're trying to do security, but they're just doing it really from a checkbox perspective. The most really good security analysts that I've ever met are very, very ambitious. And it really came down to more about learning the next thing, the new level of attacks, being able to try to help mitigate that, how to do some kind of incident response and threat hunting, things like that. If it really wind up being, hey, it's something alerted in my SIM and I just got to do something really quick because nobody really wants to take care of it, it bored them more than anything. Yeah, pay was always a big factor, but it bored them more than anything.
Yeah, they need some challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, the ambitious ones need a challenge.
Yep.
So I think people primarily stay in companies for two general reasons: when the money's right for them, and when they really feel like they're contributing something of value and they believe that they're providing that value, not because we as their supervisors or managers tell them so. They have to really believe that. But that aside, we still have this overwhelming talent management problem, largely because the technology to actually catch threats effectively today has gotten significantly more advanced in the last 5 years than I would say in the previous 8 before that. And that's done a very interesting thing. It's taken teams who have primarily focused on the analysis of events and incident data coming out of these systems to a development operations kind of concept, a DevOps kind of concept. And so they're spending just as much time now, if not more time, getting the tools to work on their behalf. So it's very important to retain talent, to also choose the right technologies for the time of the organization. This is obviously more of an evolutionary sort of a thing. I think that the biggest changes I've seen in the industry recently have been around the focus on high quality telemetry coming out of the protection points. So for instance, on the endpoint, there's a lot more going into being absolutely sure that a suspected threat on an endpoint is actually a true suspected threat. And so when that delivers that information back to that SIM, whatever that brand may be, that there's a very well-constructed storyline allowing the analyst to sort of deliver value more quickly. So it's about the right marriage between the technology and the staff and the skill set, and I think that starts to at least give them back the ability to be effective in their organizations.
So I'd like to cover the supply side of this problem. One of the things that we've done, knowing that there's 2.4 million empty security jobs in the US alone. If you're working in security, everybody wants to back a dump truck full of money up and steal people away. So what we've learned is we need to build a talent pipeline on our own and train people on technology that we want to use. And we've done that by partnering with universities and the Department of Homeland Security, building cyber ranges using our technology at a bunch of universities around the nation. And part of that charter when we bring them into this is you need to go find, let's say, 5 local governments that will never have the money to be able to afford to do good security monitoring, and bring them on and monitor them for free. And in this way, we're training people on high-quality technology in real-world situations with live fire. So when these people come out of these programs, they're literally ready to walk in and start working on the first day. You can't get somebody, unfortunately, out of most universities now that can do anything on the first day. So it's really important, we believe, to start reaching out to your local learning institutions and building programs where you can get people that are going to be trained to do what you need them to do.
Reminds me a lot of the nurse issue that we have in healthcare. Is a lot of people are starting to build their own nursing schools and build their own nurse pipeline to take care of that shortage as well.
Yep.
Got to give the right people the tools to have a little bit of fun.
Right.
Well, that's what it is. If you give people the right tools to be able to secure, and then you can focus on, they can, do the DevOps aspect and build their own tools and focus on having fun, then while keeping the industry secure, you're going to be able to keep people.
Use the tools to do the blocking and tackling so you don't have to.
Absolutely.
So having that marriage, whether it's a managed service that's going to alert, kind of using some of the pieces that we talked about earlier, or whatever it may be, it's going to help keep the people in less turnover, more secure, and less gaps you're going to be dealing with. But one gap that we talked about, which is kind of slowly closing a little bit more, is around the medical devices. Because originally when we were talking about security, it was, your PC, your edge, looking at that. But how has the industry pivoted to focus more on looking at the ability to hack into a pump, hack into a wearable device or something like that?
So I think one of the interesting things, about 50% of medical devices are blood infusion pumps, right? They're infusion pumps, drugs. They throw off much less of a alert, much less volume of alerts than other things like MRI machines. And people ask, well, why is that, right? Because a blood infusion pump is a very low footprint of power, and when they're trying to take over medical devices, it's not usually for medical data, it's to mine cryptocurrency, right? And I'm not going to be able to mine much cryptocurrency if I take over an infusion pump. But if I get an MRI machine that's probably got a real big processor and a whole bunch of disk space, I'm probably able to do a whole bunch of more crypto mining on that device. So when we look, we monitor medical device networks all the time. Much more alerts come off of the higher end systems that have more power, which is what they're looking for. They're looking for a network connection. They're looking for CPU. They're not really after medical device or medical information like you would think they are. They really want crypto mine or do things like that. So they're looking for things that have resources that are easy for them to take advantage of and do the things they want to do, as opposed to what we're used to, going in and stealing medical records.
So the vendors in the healthcare space are not in the business of cybersecurity. They are in the business of providing high-quality medical devices. And so I do see a shift in the number and the quality of the standards that are coming. But as much as you can all participate in the development of those standards, ensures that when those vendors go to develop the next generation pump or whatever it ends up being, that those standards inform how they should be built. And so there's a baseline, a growing foundation of built-in information security tools, controls that actually help limit the threat, limit the overall risk of those devices.
Yeah, and I would say around biomed, probably the biggest concern I usually hear is they're 20 years old, you know, and it's not going to be something that you can just patch and fix. I get it. I mean, it's the challenge for a lot of stuff, especially in large infrastructures. So a lot of it becomes to where the idea of trying to get something and get a company moved more around some kind of policy-based control of some sort. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to probably do it, and you're going to hear everybody have their own way of whether it's zero trust or microsegmentation, stuff like that. But in the end, it's about how do we apply some kind of policy based around it, because if our problem is that we have old devices that were built 20 years ago that use a very poor security standard, but they're not going to get rid of them, how do you do some kind of compensating mitigation of some sort? And I think that's where you're starting to see a lot more of, you know, now about policy-based access or microsegmentations like that. It's to help. How do we help mitigate that attack, that if it did happen, that it doesn't become so lateral and spread so quickly. So that's where I probably see probably a lot of the talks, because a lot of the companies can't just get rid of these devices, and they're a threat regardless of what they got to use them, but they're a threat in their environment. And so what do we do next? So it becomes the next level of how do we maybe look at your architecture of your environment.
Yeah, imagine this. I'm going to say something maybe controversial. I think that I can't patch medical devices. They're too. That's kind of a cop-out. There's so many other, as you said, Andy, so many other mitigating things you can do to protect those medical devices. The project that we did at SAR, Perimeter +1. And then you can even micro-segment it down even more. It is really just fundamentally the same good network stuff that you've been doing before. That's all it is. Don't let it, you don't have to. If you can't patch the device, yeah, I can't patch it, get over it. Now, what are the mitigating controls I can put in? Well, I can make sure nothing else can talk to it. I can do this, I can do that. So, it's the same stuff we've been doing. We just got to kind of shift the paradigm a little bit. Now we can discover all that stuff that may be medical, maybe HVAC. Now that we know what it is, we can do something about it. We can do something with it the same way we did with PCs when we started using SCCM data and could figure out what each machine was doing. So that's.
So I think what we're saying in general here is that there's things you can do right now. And it's multi-level. It's influencing the industry. It's identifying the low-hanging fruit right now. You've got to get started someplace. Why not get started on the stuff that's the path of least resistance?
Yeah, every risk you can take out today is one less risk that you have tomorrow. So
there was a good thing I heard from a security guy, maybe not hold it too close, is do the low-hanging fruit, because you just don't want to. It's like a race being chased from a bear. Just don't be the last guy. You just don't want to be worse. You don't want to be. You want to be better than your neighbor.
Right.
Because the hackers, security attackers are lazy. I mean, they honestly they want the easy stuff. Sometimes it's not about going in and trying to get into a bank that has Fort Knox, and can they get into it? But it takes them a lot of resources, a lot of time. It's going to take them a lot of money. It's if I can hit 1,000 different users and get a $10,000 from you guys, then I made my $100,000 or whatever. So it's a lot of times it's about low-hanging fruit, what was just easy, and a lot of times if you're leaving a lot of your low-risk stuff and you're just ignoring it, that's what they prefer. That's the preference. Not to say that that's always the case, but it's the preference a lot of times, because as much as you want to go home, they don't want to spend all their time either trying to come up with some slick kind of idea. If you're using mitigating risks and they really want to get in there, yeah, they'll be more clever. But most part, I hate to say the word lazy, but best way to define it is they're just as lazy. They want it to be an easy way to do it and get inside to something. That's why phishing is so effective, because it's just easy sometimes.
Yeah, a good example of that is the SWIFT banking system breach from a few years back. That was literally a very low-tech way to get into a system by where the attacker just uploaded some tools after and then just sat there quietly for, I think, 30 or 40 days, watching exactly how the system was being used and then just using the system as intended, just giving different routing numbers.
I also want to point out, and I think everybody alluded to this, everything we do for regular systems should be applicable to medical devices. So a lot of people, they don't even think about trying to patch. Well, you actually can do some level of patching. Some vendors are figuring it out and know that they need to start patching. There are ways to test in a test environment and then go back to the manufacturers, talk about the vulnerabilities they have, and encourage them to fix them. But the one thing most people are not doing is monitoring these devices just like any other system with medical information. These are healthcare systems, just like any others. They should be part of your monitoring program. You should be able to alert on incidents and things that you see happening to these medical devices, like CPU cycles going through the roof. Looks like a crypto miner. You should be monitoring for these things. So they're just like any other computer you have on your network, and you should be treating them the same way.
So it's not just the risks, when I first started in this, not even that long ago, I won't say exactly how many years, but one of the big fears was cloud. We were putting cloud into our environment, and that's going to add some risk. But it sounds like it's not just these future-facing, because a lot of different partners are putting processes in place to help that, but some of the more legacy systems that are coming through, and they're finding vulnerabilities through that, which I think is very interesting. But it does come into a buy-in of everything, the people, processes, the technologies. Are you seeing a lot of resistance from people who are monitoring, who have a focus on the clinical systems, versus the traditional IT people who are just going to get the databases and the information? Or is there a partnership going on between them?
There needs to be a better partnership, for sure. It's part of it, it's newness. What am I looking for on a medical device? How does it actually give me the ability to monitor? For example, you need to use maybe some other technologies that you're not using, like passive monitoring technologies that watch things going by on the network and make decisions rather than reaching out and I'm going to punch that system and I'm going to see what patches are on it or what vulnerabilities may be on it. Medical devices, we can't do that, right? We can't go out and run scanners to look for vulnerabilities. We may knock them over. Patient may get hurt. But you can use other technologies that a lot of people aren't familiar with, like passive scanning technologies they use in the ICS, the Industrial Control System world. Very similar types of devices. So there are new ways to do the same old things. People just need to learn what those new ways are.
Yeah, I think that's what I said. Just use the new tools to do the same things.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about different areas, I'll add my perspective that I usually see, and I'm going to give a little doom and gloom a little bit, but I'm going to be honest. If you're talking about like what you were saying, where you have some areas, and I think this is probably the biggest problem in a lot of companies, because I rarely see it where they play nice. Most of the people that are in charge of different areas usually don't play nice with each other. When you start to get in, and the problem that I usually see is when you start to get into security type things, solutions, whether you're starting to do even some type of incident response, something like that, that whole cohesiveness becomes a very big factor, because people from different areas are going to need to come in, and especially if something bad happens, are going to need to come together and figure out what the heck's going on. And call me negative, I rarely ever see an infrastructure, whether it's a company that's in healthcare or in hospitality or in finance, that the departments get along very well, especially in larger organizations, and that usually causes a lot of problems.
Are you referring specifically between?
You guys are the exception, because you guys have pointed that out.
But actually,
We have the
that's an
same
interesting
hair,
story.
too. Yeah.
It didn't start out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say in general, and I'll just be a little bit transparent here, because I don't work for the company anymore, and I can't be. We were pretty horrified about what's going to happen when you bring a new CTO in. What's his approach going to be? Here's a guy who shows up in a lot of bold colors, and he's probably got a lot of strong opinions. What are we going to do about that? And we took it as, how do we manage this relationship versus really, how do we create a partnership? Now, Wes is a very open, friendly human being. He welcomed us into his whole department. He set the tone at the top around making sure that there was an actual partnership here. And I would say overall, it works better than I've ever seen it work in any other organization. And that's to say, we didn't even work for the same hierarchy. We worked for two totally separate hierarchies.
Same goals, though.
We reestablished our roles.
That was big, though. Can't go past that. I mean, we took some time. Jackie Monson's the CISO and privacy officer at Sutter. We took a lot of time in defining, this is what you do, and this is what I do.
Right.
And remember I said, if Andrew and his shop would have said, here's a risk, use this tool to fix it, that was a non-starter for us. It's, here's the risk. Okay, Andrew, you and your folks are responsible for identifying the risks. And then he let me decide what kind of tools we used. And that was that whole role-based thing. Sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
And that's exactly the point I was trying to make. And it is really difficult when you have a team of technologists. They go off to RSA and they're like, oh man, the things I saw. And they want to go back and they want to spend. And the discipline is really, and this is where the partnership comes, I really like this thing. I really like what it does. It really solves a lot of information security and cybersecurity business-oriented problems. We had to see ourselves as a user. We had to see ourselves as a customer of the CTO, really, when it came down to it. And we had to sort of behave that way. We had to allow Wes's team to really be the service providers to us.
Yeah.
We couldn't impose ourselves in their role. We had to be very clear and disciplined about our role. It wasn't perfect, but the grinding away at it got us really good in the end. Sort of being
I agree.
You mentioned the cloud, and we were talking about medical IoT, and a lot of people think it's over here and the cloud's over here. There's a diagram I like to pull out that shows how almost all medical devices, even like patient monitors, the most simple patient monitors, are speaking back to some workstation, which is speaking back to the EMR, which is then sending data up to a cloud application. You can literally get from a patient monitor with 12 steps to anything within your organization and out to the cloud. So these things are all completely, utterly interconnected, right? So if you're thinking, you're okay because your medical devices are on a very small, isolated segment, if they're still communicating upwards, and then ultimately the cloud, you can still move data all the way outside your organization. And the other thing that people, I notice, don't do, their incident response plan doesn't talk about medical devices. What scenarios should we be dealing with if we have an incident that involves a medical device, right? We can't just run out and pull things down if somebody's hooked up to it, right? What do we do? So you should have this in your incident response plan, scenarios on what you're going to do and playbooks, how I'm going to fix things if a medical device is compromised. And you should be including them in your tabletop exercise you do, hopefully once a year, to exercise yourself on your incident response plan. And some of those scenarios you run should include medical devices. You don't want to try this the first time when a patient's life is on the line.
And by the way, I didn't do incident response. That was Andrew and his guys that did incident response. You would think that the operational folks don't do incident response. As a matter of fact, I became subordinate to Andrew at the time of an incident because he's the one that was directing it. He's the fire marshal on site, that the fire marshal is always the one in charge. And those things you do have to work out and you do have to tabletop them, because I kind of like to take charge, and I had to kind of suborn that. And it took a little practice, frankly.
Hey, teamwork makes the dream work, right?
It does.